Welcome to Teams Tuesday, a podcast about mastering the best about what other people have already figured out. Teams Tuesday focuses on insights and lessons that never expire. You will walk away from every episode with actionable insights that help you get better results and be more productive.
This was about as bizarre and easy as it gets.
The client just couldn't make up their mind.
I feel like we had top.
Went from a project of 20 weeks to just 2.
The DevOps was a cultural shift.
This is Teams Tuesday with your host, Peter Ward.
Welcome to Teams Tuesday. It's November 2023, second last one, or the penultimate one of the year. Okay, and we've got Tom Ricardo from New York City, who's going to be speaking about using Azure Virtual Desktop as a security tool. Tom, how are you?
Very good. I'm great. How are you?
I'm not too bad. And what we were discussing a little bit earlier, you are living on Park Avenue, New York, like 14 blocks from our office, actually.
Yeah, no, it's a quick walk. I take my kid to the library down the street for his activity reading time.
And were you born in New York City, or you?
No, I'm originally from Rhode Island.
Okay.
I moved to New York City to go to university. Went to NYU.
Okay, very cool. And how long have you been working with SharePoint?
I this question gave me pause. I think it was 2003 was the first version I saw. I definitely was before 2007. So.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay. Very, very cool. And what was your first version of SharePoint you've been using?
Well, I use SharePoint Online right now. My organization. Integration is kind of how we do collaboration.
Right. Okay. Now, what was your first version of SharePoint? You know, I'm sure looked at, this Microsoft, great to invest my skills in SharePoint. And was this like an on-prem 2007 or were you like 2010?
It was updating 2003 to 2007, and it was the first time I had really dealt with SharePoint. And I thought it was a learning experience. I wasn't. Yeah. It was. I remember I forgot to shift the AD and had some issues, so I had to go back and redo my steps off a backup.
Right. Okay. Very cool. And then, but you've really now like shifted. You're very much, if you're doing things like, this topic here is like Azure Desktop. You're really going into the whole Azure space.
My focus has been over the last 9 years, cloud security and cloud networking. So a lot of Azure. When we talk about Microsoft 365, a lot of Entra, discussing Intune, projects like that nature, really where I focus. Where I come into SharePoint, it's really about helping teams that are moving into that space collaborate. So understanding documentation within the SharePoint, explaining, it's a really good collaboration tool for, when you're building out that infrastructure team to take the next step.
Yep. Now, in terms of the Azure Virtual Desktop, what's the licenses you need for this?
So you really only need your E3 or E5 Microsoft 365 license to run it. That covers your OS license, and then you're just paying for the boxes in Azure. So
okay, it's consumption as well, aren't you, really?
Well, yes, of course.
Okay, yes. Okay. All right. Okay. So I know you've probably got a PowerPoint on this. So we looked at this. So the virtual desktop, like, why don't you start off with the PowerPoint, and I'll do the Q&A on that, because I've got a number of questions. In fact, a few questions have been filled in already, but I'm going to hold the questions, the Q&A until after the PowerPoint on that. So Tom, over to you.
So one of the things I want to talk about is a lot of times people look at virtual desktop as a VDI, and sometimes they don't actually look at what value it can bring to the security of your organization. So as we talk quickly today, I really want to spend the time to understand that, what are the biggest issues securing today's workforce, controlling a multi-device world, role-based access control, and then centralizing control with Microsoft 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop. So one of the biggest things, I think, and it's a difference from when I started working 20 years ago, is you used to just come in, you'd have a desktop at your office. That's what you worked on. I think, 5 or 6 years into my career, I got a BlackBerry and started that career. But now I'm on Teams on my phone. I'm pulling up SharePoint. I'm pulling up different things. I have a laptop. I don't even have a desktop. I work out of my apartment, right? Like different people are working in different places, and you have these heterogeneous environments, and it makes it really hard to kind of go and standardize, which brings complexity to your security situation.
Hmm.
And like I said, like people are also choosing their own devices. It's not, it used to be you would order, your Dell Optiplex and everyone would have the same model. And maybe you had like an upgraded model for the white glove service and stuff like that. Now people are choosing, for a long time I was a Mac user. Right now I'm using a Surface, but you can have different kind of tablets and smartphones and laptops. And, employees are expecting the ability to have some choice in that matter.
Well, also you've got more devices now. You've got tablets. Okay,
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago, it was really just the PC. Okay, and then now, like, obviously, you've got the tablets, and then you've got your smartphone.
Yeah, and I think people neglect like how much you use or how many times you might even go on your, hey, I got a quick email on your smartphone and you jump on your personal device, right? Like your work laptop might not be out, so you might be on vacation, something like that. People really are moved towards, different devices. And, when we look at this, work from home is a huge part of this. And
Right.
yes, this was happening before COVID, but today nearly 40% of full-time employees in the United States work from home, at least part-time.
I'm surprised it's that low, actually. I like maybe they're including frontline workers here, like retail. Okay, but I'm surprised. Yeah, office workers, I would have thought you're hitting 60, 70% actually. I would have thought
Yeah,
much higher.
yeah, this includes all full-time workers, right? So,
Yeah.
and it's kind of to show you, like, because how many people work in industries where they can't go and do it. So, office workers, there's a lot of people that are working from their own environments. In a lot of companies, 60% of all companies in the US don't have a physical office. I work
Is
from
it?
home every
Is
day.
it? Yeah. Well, I suppose, what you class as a company is sort of like, Mr. Contractor, 1099 contractor, who's called ABC Consulting, is a company, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, but You know, yes, absolutely. But it really gets away from people having to get, that expense of an office space, right? It makes the barrier to entry for an entrepreneur to start their own business a lot easier because they don't have to get that retail
Yeah.
space.
No, no, no.
Um,
No, the barriers to entry as well. Yeah. The knowledge economy.
and you have over 80% of companies are using SaaS and cloud-based applications, right? Like you just don't have those companies anymore that really exist within their own built space. And all of that increases your attack surface, right? At the end of the day, you're building into that shared responsibility model. And the concept, a lot of times you had people and they were always building these moats, right? It was perimeter security, firewalls. This is where my edge is. This is how you log in. It just doesn't really exist anymore. There's, you get the term SASE, and I'm not a big fan. 'Cause, secure access, secure edge. It's not really edges. I was a chemistry student in college, and you find out, there's ionic and covalent bonds, but when you get really into it, you find out there's no such thing. They're all kind of some degree of ionic and covalent, and you just kind of figure out what that is. And that's the shared responsibility model. That edge is slowly moving in your security responsibilities kind of dictate, in the environment it's in. And some environments are heterogeneous.
Well, the other thing as well with the SaaS model is that you're also outsourcing your IT department. Okay, hence SaaS shared resources. So you can have a timesheet system, which is one of the best in the world. But of course, it's shared. Like 15 years ago, if you had 5 employees, you wouldn't be able to have a timesheet system,
Yeah.
which is particularly great because you just couldn't afford the servers, the implementation, and everything else. Now the barriers to entry because it's shared. So in essence, you kind of like if you remain small with a shared service, you can then basically have the same user experience as an expensive company.
Absolutely. It's the great, once again, we're reducing that barrier to entry to start your own business and build that. Your main concerns for work from home, there's a couple of things. You got connectivity, you're home, you're worrying about, how are you getting to the internet? You're not going to be behind a corporate firewall. Data loss prevention. It's really easy for me if I'm working on my home laptop. just to go and start pulling files. You might not have the right auditing on that. SharePoint's something that you can use to avoid that, but there's other problems. Endpoint protection. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
I'm at home. I'm on my home network. My wife might pull up her laptop. She might be watching something, clicks on the wrong link. All of a sudden, my network's attacked now. Updating and maintaining software. It's a lot harder. You can't force that update on me. I can keep clicking that box. No, not today, right? Like, it happens. And then access to the machine. Sure, you can use Intune. There's tools that you can do it, but it becomes really hard, especially if it's someone's personal machine. They might say like, hey, I'm working on my own machine. I don't really want you clicking through this, or I don't want to give you admin access.
Well,
And that,
let me ask you this: you work for the company you work for. Was it Oxford? How many employees does that have?
it has 1,000 internal employees and about 2,000 to 3,000 consultants worldwide working at any time.
Okay, so let's just look at the internal employees. Do you issue dedicated PCs to them, or can they work on their own stuff?
They get dedicated PCs.
Okay. Because at Soho, employees have dedicated PCs. Okay. And we've also got it so you can't even open, we use security labels. So in many cases, you can't even open the Word documents or even download Word unless you're on a company assisted device.
So you can, with us, use like my iPhone. You can bring your own device, but that is managed through Intune. So reaching company resources, we manage that access through Intune.
Yep. Okay. No, that's the same as us on a phone. Like if you've got my credentials, you cannot access anything unless you have Intune on the phone.
Correct. You wouldn't be able to ask to register a certificate. This is really important, but there's a drawback to that. I need to jump on something real quick. Hey, Tom, can you look at this? Like the website's down. I'm at my parents' house. I'm down in South Carolina. I didn't bring my work computer. I'm now limited to what I'm able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we're getting to with the Azure Virtual Desktop. This is having that ability to kind of control when people come into a safe environment. You can log in from anywhere.
Yep. Okay.
And,
no, totally.
And like we've been talking about, it's about addressing the concerns of a heterogeneous workstation. The idea is shared responsibility. We talk about a lot of the cloud, but when you work from home, there's a shared responsibility too between the employee and the employer and their IT firm, right? Like you're hoping that in my own home network, I'm doing the right things to make sure my network's not infected, right? Like I'm hoping, you're hoping that I don't have a sniffer on my modem. I'm hoping that I'm using some sort of VPN or something when I log in. My computer is not compromised. Especially, there's protections we can put like Intune, but at the end of the day, if someone's spying on my iPhone, there's not a ton, Intune can do a lot and it can be managed in the Auth 365.
Yeah.
But, there's ways to get through that, right? There's ways for me to pull information off my own phone, even with the Intune watching that.
Mm-hmm. No, I get that.
So let's just take a little look at, talking about using Azure Virtual Desktop. So one of my favorite parts about Azure Virtual Desktop, and some people might say like, why do you like Azure Virtual Desktop over Windows 365? And for me, it's the granularity, being able to actually control your environment. Windows 365 is great if you're just looking for a simple out-of-the-box solution. But if you have a business with multi-units, you have a business where you want to kind of manage exactly how certain people are getting through, and you have a lot, let's say, more than 10 people, you're going to save money using Azure Virtual Desktop. And right now, it's the most cost-effective way to do VDI, especially for a Windows environment. And, you're looking at this, and you're like, well, there's a lot there. But what you're able to do is you're able to port your own licenses through, right? Like we're not paying an additional license fee like you would for Horizon or you would for Citrix or a workstation. Like you'd be able to move it right through, and you're seamlessly tied into your Azure AD. So your groups are right there. I can control the RBAC, the role-based access control. I can web access. I can block certain things. There's different ways for me to go and control access through into this environment. or I can have people directly from their endpoints go connect securely. Once again, this isn't going to be, it's a secure SSL, using an SSL certificate to start that session. So the other thing is I can go and scale up and scale down those sessions, especially if I have a pooled session. So the difference between a personal and a pooled is if you have a really dedicated PC where you're going to have to call it up all the time, you can put it into a personal. But if you have, I don't want to say a low impact play, but because like it could be like a high, a salesperson that's really not needing dedicated resources, you can create a pooled resource model and pull that over. And it allows you to kind of go and set this up in a way where you're really granularly going and setting up for your user. And, there's a lot of advantage to that.
Right. A question, you obviously need to be online though for this to work, don't you?
That is correct.
Okay.
However, last week they did announce that you would be able to use now with Stack. So your computer has to have internet access to where it's stored. But if it's a Stack, if you would say you're on a site that has Stack, Azure Stack, Virtual Desktop can run from that Stack.
Right. The reason why I'm saying that is that you sort of like, as you said, your parents' place, and you need to get online. Then you need to go to the coffee shop, but you can't load your virtual desktop because you're not online, because you don't know, or you haven't got, isn't that a bit of a catch-22 situation?
Yes. I mean, one of the good things is we don't necessarily need VPN access, but you do need to be online. I do think, one of the things I will say is one of the advantages of looking at this now is most times you're online. Like, I have my cell phone. If I'm getting that email and I have that cell phone, I can use it as a hotspot, right? Like most places in the United States have at least 4G where you'd be able to log in and at least get onto that virtual desktop. But that is a really good point. But it's a good thing to point out is you do need to have some sort of internet connection.
Yep. Uh-huh. Okay. And what about the performance though? Like aren't you somewhat dependent on the internet connection here?
Yeah, but it's not very thick. The best way to put it is if you can stream audio, you should be able to do virtual desktop from that sort of bandwidth.
Okay. All right. Because someone who's been on the Acceler down to DC a few times, the Wi-Fi on the Acceler is awful.
No, I would. You can use it on so I've tested it on it. I remember right before COVID, we were playing with it. I don't know if it was GA or not yet, but my boss and I were playing with it on the Acceler going down to the federal Azure show, and it was working. You don't need a lot to get it going. Said it, it was just like it wasn't moving well, right? Like it is what it is. That Acceler is not the greatest, but you can on lower latencies work with it.
Okay.
So one of the things, I talk a lot about security, where the Azure Virtual Desktop really comes in and where I think it really gets kind of overlooked as a security device is it really gives you a lot of tools through your VDI to go and lock down using resource groups, as well as lock down that environment for you to understand what you're doing. Because I can, using Intune, I can lock down devices that are able and not able, and what applications you use for registered devices. But Azure Virtual Desktop, I can lock that down using a key vault. I can lock down very granular to the files level. I can lock down the very data on it to make sure you're not taking it out of that environment. I basically can create a bubble where you can interact with the environment, but you can't actually go and take things in and out. I mean, you could screenshot if you wanted to, but you wouldn't be able to go and say you grab an Excel or grab a download of client files if so chosen. And that's the DLP advice and the ability to really lock it down and make sure you know what you want to do and tie those permissions into user groups directly off Azure AD and Entra really helps you kind of lock it down. And what you can do is really get to a point of granularity where, you can really control the actions of your users, meanwhile still giving them an experience of a full desktop.
Is that a little bit of the case of monitoring the users, a bit of a Big Brotherish, where you can see when you log in, log out, what you're doing, kind of thing? Is that all being tracked?
Yeah, you can certainly set that to track everything you do in the cloud. One of the things I think is an advantage, and I do get the Big Brother reference, but one of the advantages I think is you get to track the logs. I went to grad school of forensic computing, so audit trails are a big part of what you study in chain of custody. But being able, if there's a problem, being able to go back and check and see what happened. I remember a couple of years ago, I was at a company, not Oxford, and we had some employees, and we noticed them, pulling files out, and we realized that they were going to leave. It was able, this could have been more devastating if we weren't able to track that information. And it's through these tools that you can go and make sure you don't have a data breach.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about it, storage is a really big part of this, right? DLP is really important, and it's not just your own employees. And yeah, there's a big but like if you get a ransomware attack, you want to make sure that if people are getting into your systems, they're not hopping through and getting your data. And having secure online data, which is backed up, is one of the best. Besides, ransomware attacks, it's about really making sure your employees are acknowledged and making sure there's not the ability to lock down your storage, right? Delete your storage, not copy it. And being able to make sure that lock down what software can get to that storage, be able to manage that storage, and then maybe the track who's trying to get to it, and able to encrypt it through BitLocker so someone can't grab it in some sort of data leak. That's vitally important, especially as we're looking at Europe. If you're a country like my company is in the United States and Europe, and Europe's really looking to lock down GDPR hard, right? They've enforced it, but really doing it, being able to have that audit trail to prove that we've locked down that data, PII is really important. If I have different users going and working with it.
Right. No, totally.
I've been using the term least privilege a lot, and I just kind of want to, if someone's not.
What is it? I've never heard. What is this least privilege? What does that mean?
So here's an example. Ted's come down and he's visiting you in Soho Dragon office, right? So he came in for a meeting and his watch died, so he put it on a charger. So his watch is in your office. He leaves. Now he's an employee and he has access to his key card, has access to A, G, and K. Like these are different doors. You can see, the bluer offices he doesn't have access to with his key card, which your office wouldn't be, but the light blue are ones he does. The questions asked is, all right, if he has access to these rooms, what access do I need to provide for him to get to your office? And the answer is I. And the reason why is, that's the way. Now, let's say he had access to key C2. Well, then what key would you give him? And you would answer key F. Why you want to give the least amount of access that you need to get to where you need to be. So the idea of least privilege is taking a look at what your permissions are already, and then only escalating the absolutely necessary parts to do what you need to do. So when you look at everything, what you're trying to do is say like, hey, you don't need to see, let's say you're doing Secret Santa, right? You don't want someone to see everyone else's gift if they don't need to. And you're like, well, you're not helping me wrap. I don't want you to see why. Because that way you're preventing, someone going, oh, I saw Tim wrapping your gift. It was a, toy train. There's that leakage. So what you're trying to do is really limit people to only having the bottom line privilege to go and work with the things they absolutely need to.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about,
and this is all done through this is all done at AD, correct?
Yep.
You're doing, okay. So how does this generally work with at Oxford? You're doing contractors. Are you having to give AD accounts to all of the contractors as well?
It depends on the account, but yes, we have our contractors come in and have a certain profile that they have when they're on a contract. right? They get a certain email, they have access to certain tools, but there's other tools they don't need to have. While they have Teams access, they might not necessarily need my sales data. There's no reason for them to have sales data. They might not need, they don't have a reason to really go into Power BI and pull up, business intelligence and stuff, right? They only need the tools. They might need Visual Studio. They'll need Teams for collaboration. They'll have certain SharePoint sites that they do have access to with some files on it, but other SharePoint, they're only needed for internal employees, right? They don't need to see, the presentation I'm working on for another client.
Yep.
So it's the application groups. So you have that ability, and then I might turn around and say like, hey, you're working XYZ office. I don't need you to, if you're not an XYZ office, I don't need you to connect out. So I don't have to give you remote access.
Fair enough.
Right. Or hey, this project is being done, it's supposed to be done in the United States. I don't want you accessing remoting in from, some beach in Bermuda or Bahamas. So I'm going to lock that down. There's different ways and reasons. And once again, it's based on use cases, but it's also based on least privilege.
But you can do that in M360. You don't need virtual desktop to do that. Like M365, you can have it. So we have country restrictions on IP addresses. So if I'm in France and I'm on vacation, I can't get my email unless I'm put on a safe list.
Yeah. So what this does is, while you can manage a lot of this with Intune and stuff like that, what VDI does is it allows us to go and completely control that virtual network, especially if you have to log in off of, hey, I need you to go and do something on Virtual Studio, right? Like you're off of that. I can create like an environment for you to log in maybe on your iPad to go in the Virtual Studio and do that, because you can use an iPad to connect to Azure Virtual Desktop. So what is it? It's standardizing. While the security features are through these different devices, I'm standardizing an environment which I know you can go to, that I know is clean, and go through, and all you need is the web access to it. And that's really what we're trying to do, is create those standardized environments. If you're jumping on your home computer, if you're jumping on a device that I don't have managed in Intune, even if you have your laptop, and for whatever reason the corporate VP isn't working. Like there's been times, we use Zscaler. Zscaler doesn't work. It isn't working for whatever reason. Certificate hasn't been updated. It's not noticing. So I need to go work. I can use VDI around that and use Azure Virtual Desktop as a platform to work in those experiences. When we're talking about that, it allows MFA, it allows you to manage MFA on all devices, right? Because yes, an Intune controlled iPhone or iPad, I can manage MFA to talk to these. But let's say, it's just my personal laptop and I might not have the access to do it. I can allow access. I don't have to worry about, I can say like, all right, any laptop, or you can say, hey, I need you to be able to access the environment. You need to have XYZ for me to feel good about it. Setting up that conditional access, it allows me to make sure when you're doing apps, anything you're using, I'm allowing audit access for. And I think that's really important when you're really looking at, securing the environment, especially when you just don't know what they're logging on with.
Yep.
It's a way, you're talking about your lockdown environment. It's a way for you to go and set conditions, set different apps. I can, it gives me a lot of granular ability to choose what I want to do, whether it's, maybe I don't need certain things locked down. Maybe, Intune, I have a dev department where they're trying different packages, and it becomes really hard for me to manage like a dev sandbox, because I have to accept everything. They're supposed to be writing API integrations or testing new API integrations. And what's happening is we're getting really tied down with accepting and going through this. And this is before, or maybe they're the group that tests the API connections before I go and accept it and put it into my AD as an accepted API. I can create a sandbox with my VDI and make sure it's not connected to the rest of my network. Right. And then my developer on their corporate laptop can have a sandbox tool that's not risking going and affecting my rest of my environment. I can basically create a, black box environment outside of my own. And there's different ways to do it, and it gets really granular. And it's conditional access policy. And it's really going to give you that ability to lock these things down one way, lock them down, or give them the freedom to do what you need for a job while not breaking your corporate security policy. Of course, all of these work in unison with the rest of the Microsoft suite and the 365 tools, SCCM, Intune, using desktop analytics, co-management, autopilot. You can tie all these together. You can make sure that you're using your Office 365. It can tie to a login, so you're not worrying about managing the licenses. In the Defender, you can tie it in. You get that E5, and you can have these different things. And then now the one thing I forgot to add to this. Oh, I did. Is the Entra access. So now I can go and make sure when I go do this that I can go and make sure that, we're using Microsoft Internet, the access in almost as that SaaS model, that SASE model, using the Microsoft AD to deal with that. It gives you the ability in one set to manage your whole security posture, and it gives you the ability to connect to different clouds, connect to whatever tools you want, but basically secure yourself and understand and manage it from your Azure AD. I think that's really powerful. So
that's an old slide, isn't it? Go back a slide.
It's a little old.
Power Apps, Stream, isn't that going away? What else we got on this one? Yeah.
Transition slide would be the best way to put it.
I know. Yeah. You're not the only person I pick up on this. Okay.
Well, I saw the first part of the slide. I'm like, oh, this is an old slide. Then I'm like, the intro. I'm like, must have been. And I was like, yeah, this was over the summer. I put this together because I was like, it's when we were moving away from some of these things and moving into Entra and stuff like that. But no. And once again, these are the takeaways. And as we're going through, we talked about heterogeneous environments, controlling a multi-device world. We reviewed least privilege, RBAC, and then talking about Microsoft 365 and AV. And, I think there was a lot there. It was a little thick, but what I want people to do is, sometimes you get pushback. You're like, I want to use this tool, and you sell it. Well, I want to use virtual desktop, and people go, well, why? We can just let people have a VPN and enter in or use Entra. And you say, no, like I want to use virtual desktop because this is a security tool. It protects your company.
No, makes sense.
So we're at the questions.
Yeah, I'll go. Okay, so we've looked at this a little. Well, I've looked at this a little bit. Okay, how much is it going to cost a month in terms of consumption? Okay, it depends on the person. I've got somebody in sales who uses Dynamic CRM, M365, and and the sales tool. How much is this going to cost?
It also depends on how many users you have. So
okay, per user.
And what license are you using too? Like you're gonna want to have at least a Microsoft 365 E3, right? Like you need that.
Okay, you've got an E3 license.
But you're probably looking at, in that case, let's say you're going, you want a solid state drive. You're looking through. It could cost somewhere between like $100 a user, and then the economy of scale. The more users you have, the cheaper it is. And we're tying. You're spending of that 100. Let's say 35 is your Microsoft 365 license. Yep. 65 would be the infrastructure cost. And we're talking a small company here, someone between. This is a fairly powerful user. So let's say your standard dev engineer that's going to be rolling in with Studio and some of these pieces.
Well, yeah, that's my next question. You got some like a full-on dev engineer who's using or graphic designer who's using Photoshop. What's the video editing tool? These guys, Canvas or whatever. You're probably looking at doubling the amount per, aren't you?
No, I was so. In an example, if I've said 100, I always go higher, right? So that would be a high-end, like solid state drive developer. If you're talking like an average office worker, let's say, so the infrastructure cost the best way to put it is that infrastructure cost per user is going to be about $15 to $20 per user in Azure infrastructure cost, unless you're going and bulking that out. Now, if you're using sales users, and I hate to pick, but let's say that you what, I overkilled on your. And I apologize. You were saying like a Salesforce, Office 365, maybe like Sage or some sort of ERP. You're talking about the infrastructure cost for that user is going to be somewhere to $15 to $20 a user, because you can put that into a pooled resource pool, right? Like I don't need to have that be a personal. Something more of a programmer, and then you're going to add from that 15 to 20, you do have to have your E3 license, so $35. And then there's going to be additional cost of like your first year installing and getting some of the stuff together, but and the other SaaS costs combined to that.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Okay, yeah. All right, okay. And Tom, I noticed on your LinkedIn profile, you are a Citrix kind of guy. So this is Citrix presentation layer is like a light version of this. Is that correct?
Yes.
You have to think about that one, aren't you?
Well, I don't want someone going, it's not a light layer, it's a,
Hold on.
You can get, where I'm going to say is, you're going to say, if you're a Citrix user or you're a Horizon user, you're paying an extra bit for a management portal that's a Citrix management portal or a Verizon, right? Like I would say there's no added benefit. And once again, they're Azure Virtual Desktop. If that's how you manage it and you want to roll that licensing and deal with this into Azure Virtual Desktop, you can, right? You can go and extend it, but you're paying an additional license. And one of the things I will say is, like, when people come to me like, what firewall is best? It's the one you configure the best. So if you're used to using Horizon to manage your VDI and you want to use Azure Virtual Desktop as your background, that's what you're going to do. But they act as more Citrix. They're more overlays nowadays, because you really don't need. They used to bring value and they could pull resources, but now you don't need that. Azure can go and manage your resources for you, whether you're on-prem or if you're using cloud resources, right? You can use Azure Virtual Desktop to create that pull resource pool for your VDI.
Right. Okay. Because like Citrix, like for the last 15 years, they saw like the only gaming show. Well, the only name. There's also, I think, Sonic as well, and obviously now you've got the Microsoft thing as well. So I'm assuming now, like Azure Virtual is Showtime. If you're using the Citrix desktop, Azure Virtual one is equally, if not better.
Yeah, it really just becomes, at this point, Citrix will use Azure Virtual. The newest Citrix will use Azure Virtual Desktop as a background.
Oh,
right?
Is it really?
Yeah. Both VMware, Horizon. So when I say Horizon's VMware and Citrix, they're Azure Virtual Desktop partners.
Okay. All right. Okay, that's interesting. All right. Okay. And then Sonic Wall, are they still around?
I think so. I don't think they do Virtual Desktop anymore.
All right. Okay. Oh, I think they're more of a VPN. I think they're more of a VPN thing, aren't they? Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that's right. Okay. Because the other thing, well, I just noticed as a consultant, you have to remote into like 15 different environments depending on the day of the week. So you always have the Citrix. So everyone's got these Citrix VPNs and Cisco and all kinds of VPN clients, and it all becomes rather confusing quite quickly.
Yeah, and that's where the AVD also helps out, right? Because you can create like, hey, I got different clients. Let's say I have 3 different clients I have to log into. I can create an environment for each one of my clients and then have them log in with whatever preferred method, right? And then I can pull up so on my computer, I'm just logging into wherever it goes, but then I can set a virtual desktop. And it's really good for that. If you're using consultants and you have kind of these roaming consultants, creating that temporary environment for them to work on, it makes it a lot easier, because you go,
right.
You put them as a guest in AD and then manage the permissions from there.
Understood. Okay, Tom, where can people find you in terms of your information? Are you doing any speaking stuff coming up?
I don't think I have anything left for the year. I just was speaking at the Rochester Security Summit a couple of weeks ago. I haven't started looking next year, so I usually speak at security summits, but people can find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I'm often. Go ahead.
Okay, I've got the Twitter. I'm just putting your Twitter feed in the Q&A. Someone asked about that.
Yeah, my Twitter has no tech stuff on it. I would
Okay,
go to
I
my
will not
LinkedIn.
announce it. Okay, good. Okay, I've done that. No text on there. Yes, I'm just looking at making sure it's work related rather than sort of like what you're watching on
Yeah,
Netflix.
it's not really work related much. I would go to my LinkedIn. I generally do a lot with AWS. I write blogs with AWS and Microsoft. You know, on the AWS side, I was an AWS ambassador. So the last blog I wrote was kind of on looking at VPC flow logs, and I worked that with someone from Query. It's a security company. But LinkedIn's the best way if you're looking through. I'll be speaking at I usually speak at the New York State Security Conference, Rochester. I usually speak at vendor conferences too. And then, you know, I did a community. That's where we met. It's community day with Microsoft. I used to love doing those Saturdays. So, you know, I'm around. If you have questions, feel free to reach out.
I'll put your LinkedIn thing in this.
Yeah, that's where I usually link to. That's the best way to find me. Just shoot me a message. I usually answer.
Yep, I got that. Yeah. All right, I've just put that. All right, Tom. Thank you very much for your time. Very entertaining. All right.
It was nice. Have a great
Pleasure
one.
being a guest. Thanks. Bye.